A Beautiful Mind, by Sylvia Nasar. Introduction. Imagine this for a moment. It's a warm spring afternoon in 1959. You're in a locked room in a psychiatric hospital. In one corner, a man is slumped in an armchair, his powerful body gone slack, his eyes staring blankly at the floor. He's a mathematical genius, a man whose mind voyages through strange seas of thought, alone. But now, he's lost. His visitor, a Harvard professor, can't stand the silence any longer. He leans forward and his voice is strained, almost pleading. "How could you?" he begins. "How could you, a mathematician, a man devoted to reason and logical proof, how could you believe that extraterrestrials are sending you messages? How could you believe that you are being recruited by aliens from outer space to save the world?" The man in the chair, John Nash, finally looks up. His eyes are as cool and dispassionate as a snake's. And in a soft, reasonable southern drawl, he says something so chilling, so profound, it cuts right to the heart of the mystery of the human mind. He says, "Because the ideas I had about supernatural beings came to me the same way that my mathematical ideas did. So I took them seriously." That single sentence is the key to one of the most incredible stories of the 20th century. It's the story of a mind so beautiful it could unlock the hidden rules of the universe, and so fractured it could shatter into a million pieces. Today, we're diving into Sylvia Nasar's masterpiece, A Beautiful Mind. This isn't just a biography, it's an epic journey in 3 acts: genius, madness, and reawakening. It's a book that inspired an Academy Award-winning film and revealed to the world the secret life of a man whose ideas were shaping our modern world, even as he wandered the world like a ghost. And I promise you, by the end of our time together, you won't just understand the story of John Nash. You'll gain a profound insight into the thin veil that separates brilliance from madness, the incredible resilience of the human spirit, and the quiet, unsung heroism of a love that refused to let go. This story will show you that a life isn't defined by its highest peaks or its darkest valleys, but by the entire, breathtaking, and often heartbreaking journey in between. Book summary. Our story begins not in the hallowed halls of Princeton, but in a small, bustling town called Bluefield, West Virginia, tucked into the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. This is where John Forbes Nash Jr. was born in 1928. He wasn't a child prodigy in the way you might imagine. He was a singular little boy, solitary and introverted. While other kids were playing hide-and-seek and having crabapple battles, little Johnny Nash was indoors, alone, playing with toy airplanes or with his nose buried in a book. His parents, John Sr. and Virginia, knew their son was different. They knew he was bright. John Sr. was an electrical engineer, a serious, conservative man who answered his son's endless questions about science and technology. But it was his mother, Virginia, a former schoolteacher, who truly devoted herself to his education. She taught him to read by the age of 4 and filled their home with books and encyclopedias. At school, though, Johnny didn't shine. His teachers labeled him an underachiever. He daydreamed, he had trouble following rules, and his social awkwardness made him a target. The neighborhood kids called him Big Brains and teased him for his strange experiments. He was an outsider, and he learned early on to build a shell around himself, an armor of intellectual superiority. The first real spark of his mathematical genius came from a book. At around 14, he discovered E.T. Bell's Men of Mathematics. For the first time, he glimpsed a world of pure, beautiful ideas, a world far away from the dull arithmetic he learned in school. He was especially captivated by the story of Pierre de Fermat, and on his own, Johnny managed to prove one of Fermat's famous theorems. It was a thrill, a moment of discovering his own power. It was like a key turning in a lock, opening a door to a universe only he could see. But even then, he didn't dream of becoming a mathematician. That seemed as practical as becoming a concert pianist. He followed in his father's footsteps and went to the Carnegie Institute of Technology in Pittsburgh to become a chemical engineer. It didn't last. He hated the labs, the rigid rules, the lack of deep thinking. He complained that chemistry wasn't about how well you could think, but how well you could handle a pipette. Meanwhile, he was dazzling his math professors. They saw his originality, his hunger for difficult problems. One of them called him a young Gauss. They urged him to switch his major, to embrace his true calling. At Carnegie, the pattern of his childhood repeated itself. Intellectually, he was a star. Socially, he was an outcast. His peers found him weird and arrogant. He was unsophisticated, played the same chord on the piano over and over, and would pout if he lost a game of bridge. He was relentlessly teased, called homo and Nash Mo. They sensed he had a problem, but they were also kids, and as one of them later admitted, we tormented poor John. We were very unkind. He became desperately lonely. But it was in this pressure cooker of social rejection and intellectual triumph that Nash began to forge the ideas that would change the world. In the fall of 1948, at the age of 20, Nash arrived in Princeton, New Jersey. In those days, Princeton was, as one physicist declared, the mathematical center of the universe. It was a sanctuary, a hothouse where giants like Albert Einstein and John von Neumann walked the halls. It was a place electric with ideas, and Nash, the awkward boy from Bluefield, had arrived in paradise. The head of the department, a gruff, brilliant mathematician named Solomon Lefschetz, gathered the new graduate students. He told them they were the best of the best, but compared to the real mathematicians at Princeton, they were ignorant, pathetic babies. Lefschetz's philosophy was simple: sink or swim. He valued originality and independent thinking above all else. He didn't care about classes or grades. He cared about research. He told them, "Don't come to me with your pretty proofs. We don't bother with that baby stuff around here." This environment was tailor-made for John Nash. He hated absorbing knowledge from others. He wanted to rediscover everything for himself. He rarely attended classes or read books. Instead, he learned by talking to people, by asking probing questions, and most of all, by thinking. He spent his days pacing the hallways, riding a bicycle in smaller and smaller circles, or lying on a table in the library, whistling Bach, completely lost in his own world. He was obsessed with finding the biggest, hardest, most important problems. He even made an appointment to see Einstein, sketching out his own ideas for amending quantum physics. Einstein listened politely and then, with a kind smile, told the young man, "You had better study some more physics." But it was in a new, slightly looked down upon field that Nash would make his mark. That field was game theory. Game theory was the brainchild of the brilliant John von Neumann. He had realized that human interactions, from poker games to economic competition to nuclear war, could be analyzed as strategic games. The key problem, especially when there's more than one person involved, is that you get stuck in an endless loop of circular reasoning. I think that he thinks that I think that he thinks. Von Neumann had solved this problem for zero-sum games, where one person's win is another person's loss. But most of life isn't like that. Most of the time, there's a possibility for everyone to gain something. For these non-zero-sum games, von Neumann's theory was incomplete. He believed that players would have to form coalitions and make explicit agreements to solve the game. Nash had a completely different intuition. He wasn't focused on the group, he was focused on the individual. In his slender, 27-page doctoral thesis, written when he was just 21, Nash introduced an idea of breathtaking simplicity and power. It became known as the Nash equilibrium. The idea is this: a game is solved, it reaches an equilibrium, when every player is independently choosing their best possible strategy, given the strategies that all the other players have chosen. At that point, no single player can improve their outcome by changing their strategy on their own. It's a point of stability, a natural resting point. This insight cut through the endless "I think that you think" loop. It provided a way to predict outcomes in complex situations without assuming that players would all get together and cooperate. It was a profound update to Adam Smith's idea of the invisible hand. Nash showed how a system of independent, self-interested individuals could, in fact, produce a coherent and predictable outcome. When he took his idea to the great von Neumann, the older man dismissed it. "That's trivial," he said. "That's just a fixed-point theorem." It was a crushing rejection. But Nash, as always, trusted his own mind. He knew he had found something important. In just a few short years at Princeton, Nash had produced a storm of brilliant ideas. He invented a clever board game called Hex, which became a fad in the math department. He wrote a classic paper on the bargaining problem, showing how two rational people would split a pie. And he laid the foundation for modern game theory with his equilibrium concept. By his late 20s, he had it all. He was a rising star at MIT. His genius had won him recognition, respect, and even love. He had married a beautiful, brilliant physics student named Alicia Lard who adored him, and they were expecting a child. It was a brilliant strategy, this life. It seemed like a perfect adaptation. But underneath the brilliant surface, all was chaos. He had a secret mistress, a nurse named Eleanor Steyer, and an illegitimate son he barely acknowledged. He was involved in a series of intense, emotional, and secret friendships with other men. He was torn by a deep ambivalence toward his wife, his university, and even his country. And underneath it all, there was a haunting fear of failure. He was turning 30, an age when many mathematicians feel their best years are behind them. The pressure was immense. And then, the beautiful mind began to unravel. It started subtly. In the winter of 1959, he walked into the common room at MIT holding a copy of the New York Times. He remarked to no one in particular that an article on the front page contained an encrypted message from inhabitants of another galaxy, and that only he could decipher it. His colleagues thought he was joking. But it wasn't a joke. He began to see hidden meanings everywhere, in a red necktie, a license plate, a number. He believed he was a messianic figure of secret, but great, importance. He wrote frantic letters to ambassadors, to the Pope, to the FBI, outlining vast conspiracies. He told people he was on the cover of Life magazine, disguised as the Pope. He declared himself the Emperor of Antarctica. The ideas about supernatural beings, he later explained, came to him in the same way his mathematical ideas had. They felt like revelations, flashes of divine intuition. So he took them seriously. This was the onset of paranoid schizophrenia, the most catastrophic of mental illnesses. It's not a flight from reason, but in some ways, an exacerbation of it. It's a world where everything has meaning, nothing is random, and the mind builds intricate, logical, but completely delusional systems. For the next 3 decades, John Nash was lost in this world. The lost years, as his biographer calls them. He fled to Europe, trying to renounce his American citizenship and become a citizen of the world. He was arrested, deported, and institutionalized. He was subjected to brutal insulin coma therapy, a treatment he later described as torture, where doctors induce a coma by lowering a patient's blood sugar. He spent years in and out of mental hospitals. When he wasn't in a hospital, he became a ghost. He returned to Princeton, the scene of his youthful triumphs, but now he was a phantom. The Phantom of Fine Hall, the students called him. He was a sad, silent figure who haunted the campus, oddly dressed, muttering to himself, scribbling mysterious messages and numerological formulas on blackboards. His wife, Alicia, stood by him for a time. She endured the chaos, the fear, the public humiliation. But the strain was too much. They divorced in 1963. Yet, in an act of incredible loyalty and compassion, she never truly abandoned him. After he was released from his final long-term hospitalization, with nowhere else to go, she took him in. He lived in her house in Princeton Junction, not as a husband, but as a boarder. She gave him a quiet place to exist, a sanctuary. While the man himself was a phantom, his name, the name Nash, was quietly taking over the world of economics. His ideas from that brief, brilliant period in his youth were being applied everywhere. You'd find Nash equilibrium in economics textbooks, Nash bargaining solution in political science papers, and his name attached to theorems in pure mathematics. A new generation of scholars who had never met him, who assumed he was probably dead, were building their careers on his work. He was a legend, but the man was gone. And then, slowly, miraculously, the waking dream began to end. The change was almost imperceptible at first. It was a gradual tapering off, a slow reawakening over many years. In the late 1980s, Freeman Dyson, a famous physicist at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, saw Nash nearly every day. For years, Dyson would greet him, never expecting a response. Then one morning, Dyson said his usual good morning, and Nash spoke. He spoke a clear, rational sentence about Dyson's daughter. Dyson was astonished. He later said, "What I found most wonderful was this slow awakening. Slowly, he just somehow woke up. Nobody else has ever awakened the way he did." He began doing mathematics again. He started talking to people in the common room, asking questions. He learned to use a computer and began corresponding by email with other mathematicians, who were amazed to find that the sharpness, the originality, the toughness of his mind was still there. He was looking at things from a slightly different angle, just as he always had. He was, as one of his colleagues said, a walking miracle. This slow, quiet return to the world might have remained a secret within the small community of Princeton. But then came a moment that would change everything. It's a mild day in early October, 1994. A mathematics seminar has just ended. Harold Kuhn, Nash's closest friend from their graduate school days, catches up with him at the door. They decide to sit on a bench outside, near a small Japanese fountain. Kuhn, his voice thick with emotion, gets straight to the point. He tells Nash to expect an important telephone call the next morning, around 6 o'clock. The call will be from Stockholm. Nash, who usually avoids looking people in the eye, turns his head and fixes his gaze on his friend. Kuhn's voice breaks. "He's going to tell you, John," he says, "that you have won a Nobel Prize." And just like that, the phantom was gone. In his place stood John Forbes Nash Jr., Nobel Laureate. The world that had forgotten him, that had assumed he was either dead or lost forever, was about to learn the story of his beautiful, broken, and ultimately triumphant mind. Commentary. What an incredible journey. When you step back from the details of John Nash's life, you're left with a few profound and timeless lessons. Lessons that are just as relevant for you, as a young person figuring out your own path, as they are for a world-renowned genius. First, there's the question of genius and madness. Nash's own chilling words, that his delusional ideas came to him in the same way as his mathematical ones, suggest that the line between them is terrifyingly thin. It makes you wonder if that kind of radical, unconventional thinking, the ability to see the world in a way no one else has, comes at a price. Nash's mind was a tool of immense power, but it was also incredibly fragile. The same qualities that allowed him to break through the toughest mathematical problems, his intense focus, his distrust of conventional wisdom, his ability to live almost entirely inside his own head, may have also made him vulnerable. It's a powerful reminder that our greatest strengths can sometimes be connected to our deepest vulnerabilities. The second lesson is about the true nature of success. We often think of success as a straight line, an upward climb from one achievement to the next. Nash's life shows us that's a complete illusion. He had this brilliant, meteoric rise, followed by a fall into a darkness that lasted for 30 years. 30 years. Most people would have been written off completely. But his story didn't end there. His reawakening shows that life isn't about reaching a peak and staying there. It's about resilience. It's about the capacity to endure the lost years and still find your way back. His most profound victory wasn't winning the Nobel Prize, it was the quiet, day-by-day struggle to reclaim his own mind. And that leads to the third, and perhaps most important, lesson. For all of Nash's focus on logic, rationality, and individual self-interest, his story is ultimately a testament to the power of human connection. He was a man who tried to turn life into a mathematical calculation, to strip it of emotion. But in the end, it was emotion, love, loyalty, compassion, that saved him. It was Alicia, who, even after their divorce, gave him a home and treated him with dignity when the rest of the world saw only a madman. It was his friends and colleagues at Princeton who created a quiet, supportive sanctuary for him. A place where the phantom could exist without fear or judgment. They didn't cure him, but they gave him the one thing he needed most, a community that accepted him. His life is the ultimate proof that no mind, no matter how brilliant, can survive on its own. We need each other. So, what can you take from this today? First, find your own Princeton. Find a place, and more importantly, a group of people, who value you for who you are, who challenge your thinking, but who will also be there to catch you if you fall. A supportive community is the anchor that allows you to take intellectual and creative risks. Second, don't be afraid of the crooked path. Your life won't be a straight line. There will be detours, setbacks, maybe even periods where you feel completely lost. Nash's story teaches us that these lost years don't have to be the end of the story. They can be a fallow period before a new beginning. Be patient with yourself. And finally, never underestimate the power of simple, human kindness. The grand gestures are rare, but the small acts of loyalty, patience, and compassion are what truly sustain us. Alicia's decision to let John live in her house as a boarder wasn't a dramatic, headline-grabbing event. It was a quiet act of grace that, over many years, made his recovery possible. That was a summary of A Beautiful Mind by Sylvia Nasar. We've journeyed through the incredible highs and devastating lows of John Nash's life today, but a summary is really just a map. The real treasure is found when you explore the territory for yourself. This book is filled with so much detail, so much humanity, that you can't help but be moved by it. It's a story that stays with you long after you've finished. If any part of this incredible story of genius, madness, and redemption has touched you, I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning the facts of a great mathematician's life, it's an experience that will make you think deeply about the nature of the human mind and the incredible power of the human heart. There's a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It tells us we're on the right track and ensures you won't miss our next deep dive into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep exploring these powerful ideas together.